Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have apparently disturbed Prince William's peace once again, and honestly, at this point, one has to ask whether that peace is made of glass, porcelain, or just extremely sensitive headlines. According to the latest royal report doing the rounds, the Prince of Wales is said to be frustrated, irritated, and increasingly exasperated by what he sees as Harry and Meghan's continued use of royal status, even though they stepped back from official duties back in 2010-20. And just like clockwork, this frustration has been carefully packaged, sourced to insiders and delivered straight to the tabloids, because nothing says private family concern like a public magazine spread. What's fascinating is how familiar this story feels. We've heard this song before, haven't we? Different year, same chorus. Harry and Meghan breathe, and suddenly it's framed as a constitutional dilemma. They write a thank you letter, and it's treated like a declaration of war. They travel internationally, and it becomes a quasi-royal tour, a phrase that sounds ominous but doesn't actually mean anything legally, practically, or logically. It's royal anxiety dressed up as concern for optics. According to the report, William's irritation has been reignited by Harry and Meghan's supposed plans to resume high-profile overseas trips in 2026 and 2027. Pause there for a moment. Overseas trips in the future. Planned by two private citizens who run a foundation, work with international partners, and are globally recognized figures. If that alone is enough to reignite a feud, then perhaps the feud never actually went out. It was just waiting patiently for the next headline opportunity. The article reminds readers that William was already unhappy with Harry and Meghan's earlier visits to Nigeria and Colombia, which were quickly labelled quasi-royal tours. And here's where the irony really starts to shine. Harry and Meghan did not describe these trips as royal tours. They did not announce them from Buckingham Palace. They did not stand on balconies or inspect guards. They were invited. They went. They engaged with people. Cameras followed. The media did the rest. The truth is, what unsettles certain corners of the establishment is not what Harry and Meghan do. It's how they are received. Warm welcomes, enthusiastic crowds, genuine engagement. That kind of response is uncomfortable when it happens outside the carefully managed ecosystem of palace control. When popularity appears without permission, it gets reframed as a problem. Then we come to the letter, the now infamous letter sent to Australian psychologist Angela Pearl. A thank you letter, polite, professional, normal. Except, of course, it bore Harry and Meghan's crowned monogram, and suddenly we are meant to believe that this single design choice has sent shockwaves through royal corridors. One could almost imagine the dramatic gasps, a crown on stationery, somewhere in the southern hemisphere. Here's the part that often gets quietly ignored. Prince Harry is a prince by birth. That status was not erased. It was not legislated away. Titles were not stripped, and using a personal monogram is not the same as claiming an official role within the monarchy. It is symbolism, not governance. But symbolism, when it comes to the royal family, is everything, and therefore endlessly exploitable. The report goes on to claim that Harry and Meghan have been speaking quite freely about returning to Australia, framing it as something they still need to complete or reclaim. Now, the wording here is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Reclaim what, exactly? A country that isn't owned by the monarchy? A chapter of their lives that was largely positive? Or simply a connection they valued? The leap from returning to Australia to problematic royal overreach requires several imaginative somersaults, but tabloids have always been flexible like that. According to insiders, this language is seen within William's camp as troubling because it suggests an ongoing claim to a royal-style role. And this, apparently, is where the real frustration sets in. But frustration with what? With the fact that Harry and Meghan still command attention, that their presence abroad still draws interest, that people don't require a palace seal of approval to show support. What William is said to worry about most is how it all looks, and this is perhaps the most revealing part of the entire story. Not legality, not ethics, not harm, just optics. The fear that any visit by Harry and Meghan would be staged and received with the trappings of officialdom, regardless of their actual status. In other words, the concern is that the public might respond positively on its own terms, and that is something no press briefing can fully control. This idea that Harry and Meghan create confusion for the public is also worth unpacking. The public, by and large, understands that Harry and Meghan are no longer working royals. What confuses people is not their existence, but the relentless attempt to police it. The mixed messaging doesn't come from the Sussexes, it comes from an institution trying to maintain rigid boundaries in a modern, globalized world where influence no longer flows in straight lines. The narrative insists that Harry and Meghan walked away and therefore forfeited something intangible but important. Yet what they walked away from was not service or public life. It was an environment that offered little protection, little support, and even less accountability. They didn't walk away from compassion, advocacy, or connection. Those things travelled with them. There's also an underlying contradiction that never quite gets addressed. Other members of the royal family travel internationally. They attend events. They use titles. They are photographed, celebrated, criticised and defended. But when Harry and Meghan do similar things independently, it becomes a threat. Not because of what they're doing, but because they're doing it without asking. And this is where the humour almost writes itself. Imagine the crisis meetings. They've gone abroad again. On whose authority? Their own. Unacceptable. The idea that two adults with careers, families and global platforms should simply fade into obscurity because they no longer sit within the palace structure is not just unrealistic, it's absurd. If Harry and Meghan truly posed no challenge, no discomfort, no relevance, there would be silence. No anonymous quotes, no leaks, no recycled outrage. The constant need to respond, refract, and reframe their actions proves the opposite. It proves that they still matter culturally, globally, and symbolically. Ultimately, this story isn't really about Prince William's peace. It's about an institution grappling with change. Harry and Meghan represent something modern, unscripted, and difficult to contain. They operate outside the old rules, and that makes people nervous. Not because they're doing something wrong, but because they're doing something different. And perhaps that's the real disturbance. Not a letter, not a monogram, not a trip to Australia, but the quiet, persistent reminder that relevance today isn't granted by birthright alone, it's earned through connection. Harry and Meghan didn't break the monarchy. They simply stepped away from it and continued living visibly. And for some, that's far more unsettling than silence ever could be.